Korea Mapinduka, and welcome to Africa Good Morning on this beautiful Wednesday morning. As usual, we bring you the latest news from the African continent and beyond. I'm your host, Glenora Shipura. Let's take a look at what we can expect in today's broadcast. This morning, the Republic of Congo moves to abolish visa requirements for all African citizens in a major step towards continental integration. In Senegal, political tensions intensify as Ousmane Sonko is elected Speaker of Parliament just days after being dismissed as Prime Minister, and Pope Leo XIV issues a strong warning on artificial intelligence, calling for global regulation and ethical safeguards. We'll also take a look at the Botswana report along with economic news. We'll be right back on the other side of this.
Namibia is a land of movement, with waves that never stop reaching forward. Here, adventure is not something we search for. It is something we are born into. In every corner of this country, creativity rises, from artists, from athletes, from dreamers. And when the world comes to explore Namibia, they discover something extraordinary. Because when sport moves people, creativity moves ideas, and tourism moves the world toward us. Something powerful happens. A platform where movement meets imagination. Opportunity grows, where Namibia's next chapter begins. Welcome to the Creative Sport Tourism Expo. Exhibit, partner, experience. Creative sport tourism.
Starting us off in our top stories, the Republic of Congo has announced it will abolish visa requirements for all African nationals entering the country from the 1st of January 2027. President Denis Sassou Nguesso made the announcement during the African Development Bank annual meetings held in Brazzaville, coinciding with Africa Day celebrations. The decision places Congo among a growing number of African countries moving towards visa-free travel, joining states such as Benin, Rwanda, Ghana, Seychelles, and the Gambia. Sassou Nguesso said the reform is aimed at strengthening African unity and urged governments to move beyond narrow nationalism in favor of deeper cooperation and integration. The policy is expected to improve mobility for students, entrepreneurs, tourists, and researchers while boosting trade and investment across the continent. Authorities say key details such as duration of stay and entry requirements will be announced ahead of implementation. The move aligns with broader efforts under the African Continental Free Trade Area to promote economic integration across Africa. Senegal Parliament elects Ousmane Sonko as Speaker. Senegal's National Assembly has elected Ousmane Sonko as Speaker of Parliament just days after he was dismissed as Prime Minister by President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Sonko secured 132 votes in Tuesday's session, with opposition lawmakers boycotting the process and denouncing the move as unconstitutional. He replaces El Malik Ndiaye, who resigned to allow Sonko's return to a senior parliamentary role. Sonko remains the dominant figure in the ruling PASTEF party, which we will be right back with this news and more on the other side of this.
In a world where politicians promise the moon and deliver potholes, where democracy sometimes arrives in camouflage and ballots often look like formalities, one show dares to laugh with Africa, at Africa, and sometimes for Africa. This is Second Take, your weekly dose of political satire with an African soul and a global edge. From coups disguised as press briefings to ministers moonwalking past accountability, we serve the real news with sharper writing. Each week we bring you the TikTok of the week because sometimes the revolution is vertical, and the heartwarming moment of the week to remind us that not everything is burning. We also sit down with the bold, the brilliant, and the brave, voices that question power, stir thought, and spark laughter. Because when the headlines are wild, the leaders are louder, and the truth is lost in translation, we all need a second take.
Apologize for the technical difficulties experienced earlier. Continuing with our story, Senegal Parliament elects Ousmane Sonko as Speaker. Senegal's National Assembly has elected Ousmane Sonko as the Speaker of the Parliament just days after he was dismissed as Prime Minister by President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Sonko secured 132 votes in a Tuesday session, with opposition lawmakers boycotting the process and denouncing the move as unconstitutional. He replaces El Malik Ndiaye, who resigned to allow Sonko's return to a senior parliamentary role. Sonko remains the dominant figure in the ruling PASTEF party, which holds a strong majority in parliament. The development follows months of political tension between President Faye and Sonko, whose alliance was central to their 2024 electoral victory. Faye has since appointed economist Ahmadou Al-Aminu Mohamed Law as Prime Minister amid growing economic pressure and rising debt concerns. Analysts say the power struggle could shape Senegal's political stability and reform agenda going forward. Moving on to our next story, Pope Leo XIV has called for urgent global regulation of artificial intelligence, warning that the technology could deepen inequality and create new forms of exploitation. In his first encyclical Magnificat Humanitas, the Pope said AI must be disarmed and placed under strict ethical and legal oversight. He warned that unchecked technological development could lead to modern forms of slavery and criticized this concentration of power in a small number of tech companies. The Pope also apologized for the Catholic Church's historical role in slavery, saying humanity must avoid repeating patterns of oppression in new technological forms. He further raised concerns about AI in warfare, warning against machines making autonomous decisions over human life. Experts say the document is likely to influence global debates on AI ethics, regulation, and governance. In our next story, traders warn of a crisis as Rwanda tightens Ebola border controls. Traders in Bukavu, Eastern DR Congo say new border restrictions imposed by Rwanda to contain Ebola are severely disrupting trade and livelihoods. The measures were introduced after the World Health Organization called for urgent regional action following an outbreak in Eastern Congo. Rwanda has barred entry to travelers who recently visited the DRC and imposed quarantine rules on returning citizens. Cross-border traders say the restrictions have led to shortages of goods and rising prices in local markets. Residents also report disruptions to banking and currency exchange services, worsening an already fragile economic situation caused by ongoing conflict with M23 rebels. Health authorities insist the measures are necessary due to the spread of the rare Bundibugyo strain of Ebola, which has no approved vaccine. Congolese officials say more than 200 people have died, with over 900 suspected cases recorded. That concludes our top stories. We now take a look at the weather report before we return with news from Botswana. We now cross over to Botswana, where Rory Sang is giving us the latest news on the ground. Good morning, Rory.
Good morning, Dumelang. Thank you so much for having me here on Africa. Good morning.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Now, getting into your first story, an FMD outbreak in Good Hope puts Botswana beef exports at risk.
Well, the outbreak has disrupted Botswana's internationally recognized FMD-free status in affected zones across the country, and so this has prompted strict containment measures. Now, the government, through the Ministry of Lands and Agriculture, has placed impacted areas under quarantine, enforcing a ban on the movement of cloven-hoofed animals, as well as their products into and out of, as well as within designated disease control zones. At the center of the response are targeted ring vaccination campaigns for cattle in and around affected areas, as well as buffer zones along key transmission corridors, which are aimed at preventing further spread of the virus westwards. Now, because of the stringent biosecurity requirements governing international beef trade, the outbreak has led to a temporary loss of the FMD-free status of affected regions, and it has also placed lucrative export markets under threat and has raised concerns over long-term trade continuity. Now, to stabilize the situation as well as restore market access, Botswana is actually currently benchmarking its disease management strategies with neighboring countries like Namibia, as authorities seek to reinforce surveillance systems as well as strengthen regional disease control coordination.
Now, moving on, a duo back in court for third bail bid in alleged poisoning murder case.
So at the heart of the matter are the two women, that is 46-year-old Kgaugha Kalatoteng and the 44-year-old Rosina Banoge, who stand accused of working in cahoots in the alleged killing or murder of the 61-year-old Kagiso Lesetedi. And this case, let me tell you, has gripped public attention due to its unusual emotional entanglement. Now, according to court records, the deceased, that is Lesetedi, died after being poisoned in January of this year in what investigators believe may have been tied to a complicated love triangle involving the three. Now, Tuteng is said to have been the current partner, or she was in a relationship with the deceased at the time of his death, while the other lady, Banoge, is described as an ex in an arrangement that prosecutors argue may have actually fueled tension that culminated in the fatal consequences. Now, the state has maintained that the two women acted in cahoots and presenting the case as a coordinated effort rather than an isolated incident. The full details of the alleged sequence of events are still emerging, and investigators have pointed to poisoning as the suspected cause of death, pending the final forensic confirmation during bail proceedings. And this is the third time that the two women are applying for bail. Now, the prosecution has opposed their release, arguing that the investigation is still at a sensitive stage and that emotions within the community as well as the deceased family are still very high. They remain volatile, and the lawyer who is representing one of the accused, however, says that this is the right time because those emotions have apparently subsided, but the state is still opposing bail. Now, authorities are also concerned about the potential risk should the accused be granted bail at this stage of proceedings. However, the magistrate has ultimately ruled against bail twice, once in February and the second time last month in April, not primarily on the grounds of flight risk or interference with witnesses, but due to concerns over the personal safety of the accused because of the tense atmosphere that has really surrounded the case. The court has noted that the women had already spent several months in custody as investigations continue. Now, we will hear more about their bail application, which is the third one, like I mentioned, on June 16 as they return to court.
And your next story, in the doping case, a high-profile case involving 4 suspended Botswana athletes will return to court after proceedings against the Botswana National Olympic Committee were postponed due to the Defense Council's absence. Can we get into this?
Thank you, Ashwin. Now, this case involves 4 Botswana athletes who have challenged doping-related results, which ultimately or subsequently led to their temporary suspensions. And so they have escalated this matter to the High Court and are wanting to interrogate both the accuracy of the test results as well as the integrity of the process that produced them. And at the center of the court revelations is a dispute over data access as well as consistency. Now, during the last court appearance, their lawyer told court that although the athletes were granted access to login credentials for the ADAM systems, which is the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System, in order to independently verify test data, the information that was retrieved appears to differ from what was officially provided. Now, he argued that the discrepancy raises questions about the reliability and transparency of the anti-doping documentation that was used in the case. And so the athletes are effectively contesting both the validity of the positive test results and the procedural fairness surrounding how those results were handled and communicated. So what began as a technical dispute over test outcomes has since evolved into a broader legal confrontation that has implications for Botswana's sporting governance framework, if you may. This dispute emerges, especially it comes at a time where there's heightened sensitivity around doping in Botswana athletics, and there's increased scrutiny from international sporting bodies at the very same time, which has placed greater pressure on Botswana systems in order to ensure compliance as well as accuracy. But, you know, the case is returning to the High Court on the 1st of June. And as the case progresses, it is expected to carry much broader implications for how anti-doping disputes are managed in the country, particularly around data access, as well as transparency of the systems that are being implemented, and just the general safeguarding of athletes' rights within Botswana sporting structures.
As you might know, we were here the other week, I think more than a week ago, and the court had given us time to confer with the BNOC and the National Anti-Doping Office regarding access to the ADAM system. Basically, the ADAM system is what we call the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System. And the crux of the matter, or what the athletes are demanding, is that they want their own credentials, username, password, to access the system. So when we met the respondents, all they could do was to let us have a peep in through their own laptops and other devices, and we said, but that is not what the ADAM system is all about. It's about giving the athlete access, specifically access to the system. And so now, no, there's no problem. We are all of one mind with respondents, right? That they should be given time so that they can make those credentials available. And then we are to come back to court on the 20th of April, 2026. That's at 9:30. Okay. In order to update the court of how far we've gone with the arrangements for the credentials to be made available. It's quite a narrow issue. It's just about, can you give the athletes the credentials so that they can check the system for themselves, instead of telling them by word of mouth what the results are, or by a piece of paper in PDF format. And once we have gotten those credentials, I think we have dealt with the bulk of the issues.
So,
you say they have refused, or they are neglecting to, or they are unable to, but they should have by now, because as I told you last time, the way the ADAM system works is that it's an instantaneous system. So they have given excuses of one excuse after another as to why they can't give the credentials. But okay, of course, we are not having any of that, because they must give the credentials. If they don't give the credentials, then it means there's something to hide, or they are not doing something right. Maybe in good faith, they are not able to access, but they got to explain that.
Thank you so much, Rory Sang, for bringing us the latest news on the ground all the way from Botswana. We truly appreciate you on Africa Good Morning.
Well, that was all from me with the Botswana report. Let's meet again next week, same time, same place. Africa Good Morning.
All right, we're now swinging over to the financial indicators. Well, it turns out we have run out of time. That's all the time that we have for you on Africa Good Morning. From me, Glenn Rashipura. Until next time.